All right, let's get started. Good morning and welcome to the June 1st Community Corrections Partnership meeting. Clerk, would you please call the roll and establish a quorum for us?
Absolutely. Member Benson?
Here.
Member Sullivan?
Here.
Member Geller?
Here.
Member Lutz?
Here.
Member Donelli?
Here.
Member Kothari?
Here.
Member Jones?
Present.
Member Triplett?
Here.
And Chief Yarber?
Here, thank you.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I might ask Chief Deputy Dan Donelli maybe lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this morning.
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Clerk, would you please next read the Metro Cable 14 opening statement and the meeting announcement?
Yeah. This meeting of the Sacramento County Community Corrections Partnership is being cablecast live on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel, on Comcast Consolidated Communications and AT&T Uverse. This meeting is closed captioned and live streamed at metro14live.saccounty.gov. Today's meeting will replay on Sunday, June 4th at 2 p.m. on Channel 14. This meeting can also be viewed at youtube.com/MetroCable14. To make a comment in person, please fill out a speaker request form and hand it to the clerk. The chairperson will open public comments for each agenda item or call for off-agenda matters. When the chairperson calls your name to go to the podium and when the chairperson calls your name, go to the podium and make your comment. To make a public comment by phone, dial 916-875-2500 and follow the prompts to be placed in queue for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter. Please refer to the agenda and/or watch the meeting to follow along to determine when is the best time to call to be placed in queue to make your public comment. Clerk staff will transfer calls into the public meeting accordingly. Each agenda item queue will remain open until the public comment period is closed for that specific item. You may be on hold for up to an extended period of time, and your patience is appreciated. You may also send written comments by email to boardclerk@saccounty.gov. Your comment will be routed to the board and filed in the record, and that concludes the clerk's messages.
Thank you so much. So good morning again. I'm Marlon Yarber, Chief Probation Officer and Chair of the Community Corrections Partnership. No opening statements today other than welcome to our newly appointed Assistant Chief Probation Officer who's joining us in chambers, Marquez. Many of you will have a chance to meet him at some point, I'm sure. And, should I be out, I believe, his task is to take the gavel and run this meeting at some point. So welcome to Marc. All right. Moving on. Clerk, would you please read the first item into the record?
Item 1, presentation and discussion of CCPAB ad hoc committee efforts and findings.
Excellent. And I believe our very capable analyst, Laura Foster, is going to walk us through a couple items today, but beginning with this one, please.
Good morning to everyone here today. We're glad to have you with us and those who are joining us online. Unfortunately, Melinda Avey, our Community Corrections Partnership Advisory Board Chair, was unable to make it today. So unfortunately get to listen to me a little bit longer. But I am here representing the Community Corrections Partnership Advisory Board and presenting some of the work that they've been doing over the past year. So we'll get into it. So as you all know very, very well, but some of our members of the public may not know, every year we have to develop this AB 109 plan update ever since 2020. And that plan update needs to reflect the changing interests, the changing goals of this county and be updated accordingly. It also needs to represent our community interests and have a voice into that process. And the Community Corrections Partnership here in Sacramento County has made an effort to really bring in the community voice over the last several years. We've added a community member representative here on the CCP. We created the Community Corrections Partnership Advisory Board, which includes 4 community members. And that board has also done extensive community outreach, some of which we'll talk about today. And part of the goal is to make sure that it's not just our agencies who have a really great and unique perspective on the justice system, but making sure we're including the voices of those with lived experience. So a lot of the outreach this year was focused on that. And the Community Corrections Partnership Advisory Board believes that our plan will be stronger if it represents all of those interests and is reflective of the different needs in our community as portrayed by different individuals with different lives. So this year, the Community Corrections Partnership Advisory Board has developed 2 ad hoc committees to do most of their work. The first is a public awareness ad hoc committee, which is really to spread the word, to tell people what is AB 109 realignment, what is the Community Corrections Partnership, and what is the Community Corrections Partnership Advisory Board. And the goal was to increase community engagement at meetings and really just get more people involved so they can contribute to the process and be part of these meetings. The other group was outreach to the justice-involved community specifically, seeking out those with lived experience to contribute towards the plan and make sure that their voices are heard. So for that public awareness committee, there are a few things that they've accomplished this year. They moved from one of the board hearing rooms over into the board chambers, so now the Community Corrections Partnership Advisory Board meets monthly here in this room. We are also live streaming now. Ever since, I think, January was our first meeting live streaming. And so that remote participation option has really been something that our community members were requesting and has been added to our public comment that we've received. They developed and distributed a flyer that I believe we saw in this meeting here in what would have been December, at our December meeting. They hosted and recorded an informational webinar back in March. We had, I think, 26 unique participants or unique registrants. And then it was interesting when we went back through who attended. Some people, it was clear that they shared their registration with others because we had, a person logged in 5 times, which means, great, we got the word out to more people. And that's in the process of being posted to the CCPAB's website, so it will live there forever and be a useful resource. We've added some meeting notification options. Originally, we had a process by which people would fill out a form, and then I would email them before our meetings and say, hey, here's what's going on. But we just recently worked with probation staff to add basically a subscribe button onto the CCPAB's page, so people can subscribe, and anytime there's an update to that page, they'll get notified. So it takes the manual error option out of it and makes it a more reliable process. We've also gone through our website and said, hey, there's maybe some information on here that's perhaps a bit outdated, not as relevant as it could be, and so we're in the process of working with probation staff to make some of those updates. If there's anything significant, we'll come back to you for that, but I think most of it we can go ahead and just clean up. And then we're planning a second community workshop, and that community workshop will be focused around the first draft of the plan once that's available, and really presenting, hey, here's what's in the first draft. Let's give everyone a chance to comment, provide some feedback, and take that back and share that with all of you. So that's that committee has largely concluded its work. The community workshop will be handled by the whole CCPAB. It'll basically be sort of a special meeting for them with some more interactive elements. So we're looking forward to planning that. The other group, which is the bulk of this presentation, is the outreach to the justice-involved individuals. And initially, it was intended to include their families as well, although the work didn't reach that far this year. The goal was to answer 4 questions, which is to ask people, what would have prevented you from entering the justice system? During and after your justice involvement, what worked for you, what didn't work, and then what types of programs and services, if they had been available, would have been helpful for you. And we've learned a lot from this process in 2 ways, one of which is we've learned how to ask better questions and develop better surveys. And so we're looking forward to implementing that in future work. But we've also learned that sometimes the question you think you're asking takes you down a different path entirely. And that's been a really valuable process for the CCPAB this year. So I'm looking forward to sharing with you what we've learned. There were 2 approaches that we took, and we did share this preview. We previewed this with all of you in December. There was a survey that was developed, and then there was a series of focus groups that were held. The goal of the survey was to spread it far and wide, let everyone have a chance to fill it out, get as many responses as possible, and it was available online and printed. And then the focus groups were to make sure that there were certain audiences we didn't want to miss, and we wanted to say, hey, they might not find our web link here for this survey. How do we get in touch with them and provide an environment that could facilitate better conversation and just allow for, if someone's answering a question on a page, you don't get as much out of that necessarily as you do when you have a group conversation that's going. And they both provided excellent opportunities for us to get feedback. And I think the focus groups, while all of the surveys were valuable, everyone who was in a focus group also took a survey. So we captured that information as well. So what were our results? We had 117 surveys completed. We had done outreach to more than 400 individuals and groups electronically. As we mentioned, there were 4 questions as well as some demographic questions. And then we received responses from a really diverse and wide group of people, which was fantastic. I think that we didn't get quite as many, free-flowing responses. A lot of our surveys came from our focus groups, and then a really large portion of these surveys actually came from our CCC. I'm very appreciative for Lieutenant Baker and his staff for helping facilitate that. I think they had 30 or 40 that came from our CCC. So that's something that you'll see as we go through this is, some people were in the middle of justice involvement versus looking back on perhaps their own past and history. So that did affect our results, but really gave us some great perspective. So we're very appreciative. And then the focus groups we had one at Probation's Adult Day Reporting Center. We met with Alpha Oaks Residential Treatment with both their clients and their providers, Bridges Professional Treatment Services, Clean and Sober Transitional Living, Loaves and Fishes, Rio Cosumnes Correctional Center, and River City Recovery Center. We did also reach out to a couple other groups, the Washington Community Center, which serves our Latinx community, and also Decarcerate Sacramento, we reached out to them, and the LGBTQ Center, we reached out to them as well. Those organizations either didn't have capacity at this time or the individuals who participate in those facilities and in those groups often have many people asking them for surveys or focus groups. And so they typically only offer things where there's maybe an incentive of some kind, and we weren't equipped to provide that at this time. But that's something that we took back and will inform us for future efforts. We did have a few of those groups also shared with us some additional resources. Decarcerate Sacramento shared a report that they had done, and they've presented in many different areas that they had, I'm going to say the name incorrectly if I tried to say it now, but they had done some research on a state level working with some other organizations that had some crossover with the work we were doing, but had its own perspective. So they shared that with us as well, and we found that our results were fairly consistent with what they provided. So now let's talk about who we talked to. So based on our survey data, and just my qualifying remark here is these demographic questions were optional. So not everyone answered every question, but most people did, which was, we really appreciated that. So when we talk to who we talk to now, most people we spoke to were between the ages of 25 and 44. These are the same age categories from the jail profile survey divisions, so that's where why we use those age brackets. But we did have some from our younger justice-involved audience, 18 to 24, and some from our more senior community of 65 plus. When we talked about, hey, when did you first become involved with the justice system? It was a pretty broad range, but as you'll see, most, let's see, what is that? Doing some quick math, 69% became involved with the justice system before age 25, many of which became involved under 18. We asked about gender and ethnicity. Most survey respondents were med, but we did have a variety of gender identities expressed as well. And our ethnicities, they had a checkbox, a very long list of options, and if they checked one or more ethnicities, then they were classified as multiracial for the purposes of this survey. So you'll see, like, for example, there's no Asian individuals represented here. They fall within the multiracial category for our survey respondents. But we were really grateful to have such a wide range of respondents. We did not offer the survey in any additional languages, but we did have 4 who responded in Spanish, which was great. So it was nice to know that we were reaching that community even without explicitly making that effort. One of the things we asked about was education. We had over half of the survey respondents identified at least some level of post-secondary education, which was fantastic. One thing we did not ask is, where did you achieve that education? Perhaps some of them did acquire it through their justice involvement. And we weren't able to capture that in this survey, but that's something we'll consider moving forward. We asked about their criminal justice history. More than half of the survey respondents reported being arrested 6 or more times. And when it came to sentences served in a correctional facility or times on probation and parole, we had quite the variety there. So it was nice to see that we had people from different experiences, different walks of life at different stages in their own journeys. Then we asked several questions about their own history. This was a little bit more of they had a checklist again, but in terms, we had fewer respondents who filled out this section. So 93% of our 117 respondents, that's 109 people, identified that they had at least one personal history element. These were the CCPAB developed this list, and it was further refined from the CCP's input. And I'm sure we discovered there's more categories where people wrote in a few things like veteran status that we hadn't included. So I think in the future there'll be an opportunity to expand this list. People could check one or more. So what you're seeing here is out of the 109 people surveyed, 69 of them said they had experience with substance use. So that's how this works. So people could check one or more, or they could check none at all. One thing we think would be beneficial is if we created a none box in the future. So it would be super clear who was none and who just didn't want to answer the question. So that's, again, lessons learned. But we did see that the top 3 here, substance use, financial instability, and housing instability, were common needs. Then we asked about programs, services received in custody and those received upon release. So those are the next 2 questions here. 80% of survey respondents said that they received at least one service while in custody. And as you'll see, most of those were substance use, education, and mental and behavioral health services. These categories are from the BSCC's list of categories in our annual reporting that we use. So they're open to interpretation. If someone's going, well, what's quality of life? That there is some, room for personal interpretation among this list. And similarly, we had program services connected to upon release. We did have fewer people answer this question, but as we mentioned, many of our survey respondents were still in a custodial environment, so they would not necessarily have experience with release, or if they did, it would be before their current place. And so 54% responded. Most people received substance use services, employment services, and mental and behavioral health services were the most common answers. So then we get into kind of the meat of the work here, which was those big 4 questions, which is what would have prevented you from entering the justice system is the first question. And what we were stunned to discover is that many, many respondents said nothing would have prevented them from entering the justice system. In talking to the focus groups, we were able to have them elaborate a little bit more on that. And many people expressed that their parents were incarcerated, their parents' were incarcerated, and that there was a seeming, perhaps not a hopelessness, but an eventuality, an inevitability of having contact with the justice system at some point in their lives. And that was a tough one for the CCPAB to wrap their minds around, which is, well, what do you do with that? How do you change minds, change perspectives? How do you fix intergenerational trauma? It was a bigger task than I think we were equipped to address in the immediate. But it was something that came up frequently. Something I should mention is anything you see on these slides was mentioned by more than one individual. There's no one single individual's perspective represented here. It had to be mentioned several times. The other leading, what would have prevented you was sobriety, not being involved with drugs and alcohol. And I think that's consistent with what we saw in the survey responses, that so many people had a personal history with substance use. And perhaps that's, part of the groups we reached out to in the focus groups, naturally may have had more of a history with substance use. So, but that did seem to be a very, very common thread. Another thing that came up was the people you spend time around, whether that's your family or your chosen families or, friend groups and associates, that making different choices in their youth was often cited as something that would have prevented justice involvement. Having more activities after school, having more things to do. Something that came up repeatedly was kind of the dangers of idle time, and that if you don't have a purpose, you don't have a direction, you don't have something to commit your time and your efforts to, perhaps you will make other choices that aren't supportive of that direction. Stable housing and employment came up, and also understanding the law and the legal system, feeling confused by court processes or laws themselves or caught off guard, interactions with law enforcement not aligning with their perspectives, feeling if they'd been listened to by the police, they wouldn't have been arrested in the first place. So we had a wide variety of responses on this question, but yeah, the top two were nothing and sobriety. The next two questions, which is during and after your justice involvement, what available programs, services, and supports worked for you, and what did not work for you? These questions led us to a really interesting place. One thing we discovered, what we expected to discover was this program is great, this program is not great. And that was not the case. We discovered that as many people who would list a certain program in the worked for them, just as many people would list it in the didn't work for them. And what we found was that readiness to change was an enormous factor in this. That if you had identified as a person who was ready to change, every program worked for you. If you weren't, nothing worked for you. And making sure that not you're only going to be ready to change at the time when you're ready to change. And the survey respondents and our focus group members expressed that it's hard to predict when that will be. It's hard to, set up a situation by which then all of a sudden you're ready to change. But also recognizing that once you're ready, having those resources is critical. So people may need multiple times, multiple takes at services and programs, and that can be discouraging. I think from a taxpayer perspective, it's discouraging not to be able to predict those things. But that's the reality, is we're dealing with real people with real experiences, and when they're ready to change, how helpful those programs can be. But if they're not, that's a struggle. So we were kind of left a little bit confused, which is how do we sum up what actually works? And there were some common threads that came through mostly the focus group discussions, which is when people care, that made a difference. We heard, probation great, probation bad. We heard both sides of that. But the probation officers who cared, the ones who were reliable presence, the ones who made a difference, who were invested, they were praised all day long in the focus groups, and that was fantastic to hear. Similarly, you'll hear it from counselors, all different jobs and different roles in this process. If people were consistent and people cared and actually demonstrated a commitment to your recovery, and perhaps recognizing that recovery and choosing a different life isn't necessarily a linear path, having that recognition and that awareness was very helpful. Also, the other part was people with lived experience, having those who have been there, who have walked in their shoes, how helpful that is and how different that is from a perspective of someone hasn't, and a feeling that they could be real and honest in themselves, and the relatability factor was an important thing that was expressed by those in our focus groups. There's a lot of information on the next two slides, so bear with me. So we asked two questions, which is what additional service would have improved your experience while incarcerated or supported you upon release? So on this slide, I'll talk about the in-custody elements. Some of the things that came up were earliest possible access to treatment programs and services. We had a really fantastic focus group at our CCC, and it was a group of women, none of who were eligible for the reentry program at that time, but were desperate to be involved in some of those program offerings. Being able to have some education, being able to have access to employment services, and just some of the parenting classes and some of those other courses where making that idle time not idle time, making it useful, regardless of where they're at in their own case journey, I guess. And that's a big thing that was frequently expressed. Also, having immediate access to NA and AA and religious services, just things to keep busy. Access to counseling beyond just medication, that was an interesting one, because I know there have been a big push to really improve the medication services in custody, but make sure that's paired with counseling, because when they get out, it was expressed that, hey, you may not have consistent access to that same medication, or perhaps now you have something that you needed or need on a daily basis that you didn't have before that you entered into this environment. So it can be a really beneficial thing, but if it's not consistent once you leave there, then that can be a struggle. Job and career training programs, life skill, family self-improvement courses, making the most of, I know we've got those great tablet resources. Could we put things on those tablets that can help with self-betterment and just giving people something to do? Another thing that came up was nutrition classes and having more nutritional food offerings. Many people, particularly it was a group of women, who expressed that when they came into the facility and say they're there for a year or 2 years, that's a long time. And your body image, your self-image can change. What you're consuming is different. And by the time you get out, you are physically not necessarily resembling the same person you were when you came in. And that can be a real struggle in reacclimating on the outside. We had several people saying, hey, I know I can just use X drug and I'll be skinny again. And then, they'll have expressed that there would be a sense of self-worth that was perhaps lost among the journey. But if they'd had access to, more fitness classes, more nutritional options, not everyone's going to take it, but at least it'd be available. And they did express that there are some fitness classes they do have access to, and how much they appreciated those options. Just making them more available and more frequent would be helpful. Having education, academic training, lowering the cost of phone calls, and having some needs assessments done and peer navigator services early in the process. So as soon as you can identify someone's needs, the better you can set them on a path for success when they leave. One of the things that came up that I'll say isn't completely relevant to our work here, mostly it was relevant to those who had spent time in prison. And we had talked to a group of gentlemen over at River City Recovery, many of whom were freshly out of relatively long stints in prison. And they expressed that the social elements of being in custody creates a survival aspect, that your goal is to be there and survive. That's your number one job when you're in custody, and that can be affected by the presence of others and social pressures within that custodial setting. So it was basically uncool to try to better yourself, and that's the very lame way to say that, but that it could compromise their safety if they were seen as trying to make themselves better, could affect the hierarchies within the environments they were in, and that if they had just been mandated to do it, they would have been so grateful, because then everyone would have had to go, and you can get out of it what you get out of it, but not everyone would take advantage, but the ones who wanted to would feel like they could. Some of them felt, we heard from people who had just been in for 9-10 years, and they're coming out and they're going to recovery now after they've been in custody for 10 years, when they could have had some of those services earlier on, could help navigate that transition a little bit more smoothly. So then we asked about, what about upon release? Housing came up frequently, and the challenges of bridging the gaps from program to program. So when you leave custody and say you're put into treatment, but that treatment, when you get out of that, you don't have a housing place, you're back to where you started. And you've invested all this time and effort and money into treatment when they're not equipped into a place of stability where they can maintain that level of success. Assistance with transportation directly out of custodial facilities came up frequently. Relocation assistance, that was an interesting one for people who have particularly gang affiliations. Going back to the community where you came from, by law they had to go there, but now they felt like, I'm being put in situations where the people perhaps I have wronged or who have wronged me, I'm going to run into them again, and then justice involvement is inevitable. Access to clothing, assistance finding meaningful and stable employment. And one of the things that came up frequently throughout both the in custody and the upon release section was the difference between a career and a job. this idea that a job is not the goal. There are other jobs that are not necessarily legal or following the traditional correct paths that are more profitable, easier to do, easier to access, more convenient hours than your traditional jobs. But careers are meaningful. Careers are something you can be proud of. Careers are something that can make enough money to be successful, to not have to go back to other pathways. And whatever can be done to promote career development would be really helpful. I know at our CCC we had a difference between which programs men can participate in, which ones women can participate in, and that some of these, we had women said, I really want to do automotive. I think that could be a really valuable career for me. I think I could make real money, and it's useful and it's helpful. And culinary arts aren't right for me. And being able to have some of those options. I know there's a lot of challenges that go with programming, but being able to look at that in the future and say, hey, how can we make more options that have a little bit more equitable, long-term, perhaps a better match for the financial stability that those programs can offer. We also heard from people who had done a substantial amount of time who said, I want to run my own business, and I wish I had some classes to help me do that. I wish I could know where to get started. I've spent years in here just building up ideas, and I don't know where to use them and how to use them. And this idea for some level of independence, this entrepreneurship, came up a lot too, and that was an interesting one. So one of the big takeaways from the CCPAB's experiences here were the recognition that most people who enter our justice system, who enter our jail facilities, are coming back out at some point. Whether it's in 1 day, 2 days, 3 years, 5 years, they'll be back in our communities. And what can we do with that time that we have them to better equip them for success so that they're less likely to come back and more likely to go on to live fulfilling, successful lives? And so one of the suggestions was, if as early in the process as possible, doing those needs assessments and doing a readiness to change assessments, being able to, while people are pre-trial, investing in programs and services for those individuals that perhaps they're not willing to look at their own case and say, hey, I want to plea a certain way, but my life that led me to this point is not what I want to continue, regardless of the outcome of my individual case. And looking at what services can we provide in custody and while people are on supervision that can really help change that pathway for the future, and identifying it as soon as possible. So one of the really great things about this experience was just the appreciation that was expressed by those who were in these focus groups. We really weren't sure if we were going to walk into rooms and get crickets, or if people were going to speak up and share. And fortunately, they did. I think in all but one, we really had really involved groups that were so happy to be heard and saying, hey, no one's ever asked us before. And we're like, that's why we're here. And it was just a really kind of a great communal shared experience there of saying, hey, they also want to help make things better, not just for themselves, but for other people who encounter the justice system in Sacramento County. And the appreciation that people are really trying to make a difference and not just continue with the same things they've always done, and that they're looking to those justice-involved voices to contribute to that conversation. And many of them also said that, hey, they really want to read the plan once it's here, so we need to make sure we follow up and with those organizations that helped us with our focus groups and say, hey, here's the work we did and here's how you contributed to that effort. So I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but we learned a lot, and that'll change how we do some different things in the future. The CCPAB really found value in this project. This was, I think, tremendously eye-opening for everyone who was involved, including myself, and are so excited to keep going with this, keep expanding on the efforts to include the justice-involved community and look at how we can do that differently, more effectively, how we can get direct input that we can use in our plan. This was a great start, but it's not the end. So one thing is to expand those efforts to other people who are involved with the justice system. So family members of people with lived experience and crime survivors was a voice that we didn't address. to conduct specific outreach to the AB 109 population, something that gets lost in, I think sometimes just in the CCPAB meetings is, hey, we're here because of the AB 109 population. So what are their specific needs? Is that different than the larger justice-involved community? Do we need to do some specific work in that area? And then seeking feedback from justice-involved individuals on specific programs and services. So if we want to make, the CCPAB wants to make recommendations about certain programs, we need to really do the work on those certain programs. And this larger information and information gathering is great, but it doesn't help us know how successful is program X or program Y. And that concludes the Community Corrections Partnership Advisory Board's efforts. Open to any feedback, questions you have. We want to make this better and continue to grow and build upon what we've done and refine it for the future.
Well, excellent job, Laura, and appreciate you pinch hitting, as I know Chair Avey would love to be here herself. Any questions from those on the partnership? You know, as I think through some of the things that were touched upon, you know, things that we're obviously very aware of in the probation department, I'll just comment briefly. As it relates to readiness to change, I think it's such a key piece, and you know, you hit it very well with regards to whatever we might attempt may fall short if people just really aren't in a place where they can take full advantage of the opportunity, which, you know, leads us to with this struggle of, you know, trying to balance the accountability, as it seems. That's one point. And then second point, also very much, you know, high level of awareness in the probation department as it comes down to often the person that is maybe delivering those services. And so we do a ton ourselves just to train our officers on engagement. I think just last week, you know, a session on, I think it was the secrets to becoming, you know, a change agent, which is not new, something we've trained on many times, but it does come down to, you know, sometimes that person and in that moment, you know, and the recipient being ready for whatever it is that's being offered. So it makes some sense when you comment that, oh, you know, I loved the probation officer, you know, perhaps when I was ready, but, you know, when I maybe wasn't ready and the probation officer was offering things, you know, now they're just trying to interrupt the thing that I, you know, enjoy doing, let's say, which is sometimes a negative behavior. So just my reactions initially. Any other comments? Yes.
Yes.
See Director Lutz, go ahead.
Thank you. I will also echo, first of all, really good information, helpful. A lot of things that I think inherently providing services we know, but it's nice, one, to have some actual good data to back up some of that. And one thing that actually stood out to me as surprising was just how much those that were responding indicated substance use as overarching the most significant factor. A pretty significantly higher amount than the next highest at financial instability and housing. And behavioral health, or I should say mental health conditions or services, was quite a bit lower than that. And I think that's telling for us as we continue within behavioral health services to invest in our substance use prevention and treatment, recognizing and kind of aligning that comment of a lot of it is about when someone's ready to engage in treatment, and the onus then is on us to make sure that then that bed is available, that resource is available. So I think, again, just recognizing that on the substance use side, we continue to try and build that capacity, but a lot more is needed to really help this population. I also, a key takeaway that we've known in behavioral health for some time is the power of peers. And we've invested heavily in trying to recruit and develop peers on lived experience with homelessness. And we've talked recently about experience, you know, with foster youth. I really think this is an opportunity too for us to look at how are we working to engage peers and recruit peers with experience going through the justice system, and that's a unique framework and a unique background. So I think those are some definite opportunities for us to look at. Would really be interested in hearing additional focus groups. I think families would be important, particularly as we look at services that are that we're just rolling out, like Laura's Law, that could have an intersection with families. But then also just future service delivery and engagement. How can we make sure that we're supporting those families overall? And I would encourage strongly additional focus groups and surveys to be multilingual, just recognizing that we're missing some important feedback.
Thank you for that, Director Lutz. I was going to come back to the translation need as well, thinking about our elected officials who are often up here and chastising us as departments when we're not doing what you just suggested. So I strongly encourage the same. I see Deputy County Exec Kothari is asked to speak.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to echo appreciation for the CCPAB and their work on this. Really important information to share. Something that really stood out for me was the prevention aspect of it and what would have prevented you, and that nothing comment and that feeling of hopelessness. And as I've been talking to some of the more grassroots community-based organizations and really realizing some of the work that they're trying to do in neighborhoods that are disproportionately impacted by folks who have involvement in the criminal justice system, and how they're trying to really reach those youth that may come from families that have been impacted. And I know we have a plethora of prevention programs throughout the county, and I'm really interested in doing a deeper dive into how many of those are actually targeting this population that really we need to swim upstream with and figure out how is it that we instill hope and give young people something to look forward to and dream about, so they don't feel like it's inevitable that they participate in criminal activity. And I also just wanted to mention that the board has recently invested in a CBO capacity building project, over $7 million. We're getting very close to selecting an organization that will take a lead on that. And part of the goal of that, and so this is for the public, but also for my partners, is really to choose some community-based organizations, grassroots organizations, maybe smaller ones that work in BIPOC communities and disproportionately impacted neighborhoods, where we can actually build their capacity to do this really important work. And so really looking forward to seeing how we can leverage that program going forward, but appreciate this, and gives me something to think about. So thank you.
Thank you for that, sharing the information. Any other comments? Chief Deputy Donelli.
Good morning. I also wanted to jump on the thanks train to you and the advisory board for all this important work that you did. The data is very revealing, and it will give me an opportunity to go into our reentry services programs and kind of put a microscope on what programs we're offering, and also the CBOs that we're bringing in to contract with. So again, just thanks for all of this important work, and really appreciate all the data that's come out of it.
Fantastic to hear that. Others? Clerk, do we have any public comment? I don't see anyone left in chambers. Anyone on the phone?
No, sir, we have no public comments on the phone.
All right, well, let's close the public comment and move on to our second item.
Okay.
Clerk, would you please read item 2 into the record?
Item 2, discussion of revised AB 109 2023 update work plan.
Thank you, and back to Laura, I believe.
So we'll make this one pretty short and sweet today.
Thank you.
This is at the very, very end of your packet if you're following along today. Back in I think it was December, when we brought forward the original work plan for this year, we made it clear this is a living document. So it's been revised and revised every month. If you follow along with the CCPAB, you'll see little tweaks and twists in the work plan. But I just did want to share it with you today, where we're at on our journey, keeping in mind that our goal is to get that AB 109 plan update approved later this year in time to submit to the board and to submit to the BSCC. So our goal is to get the plan approved by all of you in October. So how do we get there? We only have really 2 meetings left to get all of that work done. So where the CCPAB is at, a couple of things we've been doing recently. Obviously, concluding the work of the ad hocs was a big first start. So that's where we are. The CCPAB is also looking at how do we take last year's plan and make it the most effective plan possible, while recognizing incremental change is going to be the real path to success here, but we want to make some progress. So some of the areas we're focusing on this year is really looking at that prioritization of services. Last year we have this list of 20 program and service areas, but it is in some ways too broad, in other ways unclear. It really was meant to encompass a lot, which was the intention, but it's kind of left those who are then making budgetary decisions, making program decisions, kind of lost with, well, what do you really want? What are the top priority goals? And so that was a big part of doing the work that we did with the ad hocs, was to say, hey, what can we bring back and say, where are our priorities? So the CCPAB is currently, basically each member was given last year's list of 20 priorities. We also offered up the chance to add additional things. Are there things on here we're missing? So one of those was nutritional food options. The other was restorative justice programs. So those have now been added to a list. We've given that list of the 20 things plus the additional, I think it's 22. Anyway, there's a lot of them on there. And we've given those to each member, and we've said, hey, rank these. We're not going to use that exactly and say, hey, the top 5 are the ones that go, but we're going to say, we need to understand, where do we have consensus on? What are some of the top priorities amongst our group? And recognizing that we have different agency representatives, we have different community representatives who each have programs that they would like to see shine, and probably programs they see as most valuable. So they're doing this small prioritization exercise, which will lead to hopefully a really great discussion at our June meeting, just to say, okay, so we've said this thing, whatever service is our top priority. So what does that mean? Who should be able to be reimbursed for those services? Which departments, which CBOs through which departments, not particularly naming a CBO, but like, should a community-based organization be involved to receive funding related to that item? So we're going to go through we're going to have some tense discussions, I think, over the next several meetings to really get into the work and say, hey, this lofty goal is great, but what does it mean? What is it when we put pen to paper? What are those services? What are those eligible expenses? And so that's the process we're undertaking now, and look forward to bringing back and sharing with all of you at our next meeting in August, because that will help determine some of the direction for this plan overall. The CCPAB recognizes that you are the decision makers here, and ultimately, of course, the board is the big decision maker, but they also recognize what they offer up you may change, and we want to make sure there's an opportunity for this board as the authority body here to be able to set your own priorities, and that may not align ultimately with what the CCPAB suggests, and there needs to be space to address that. So the next steps in their process, so they're working on that prioritization exercise. We're working on the initial draft of the plan. Some of the direction I was given with the plan was make it shorter, so we're doing that. And we can put a reference to another document. That document doesn't have to be in this plan. The goal is to make this a handy-dandy guide for everyone for this next year as you're developing your budget priorities. What really matters is what should be in this document. The rest can go somewhere else. It doesn't mean it's not important, but it doesn't have to be here. So that's part of our efforts. So we're going to have our draft of our plan ready in July. We will then put that out publicly with the very clear understanding that this is the CCPAB's draft, right? And then we'll bring that to you with the community input that we received from that workshop, and we'll say, here's what we came up with, here's what we heard, what do you think? And give you that August meeting to really give us some solid feedback. If we need to change direction, do what we need to do so that we can bring back a plan for you in October that you will be on board with and supportive of, that aligns with your priorities and your perspectives. So that's the end goal. So August is going to be a big one. Don't miss it. The other thing that's going to happen in August that was originally planned for earlier this year was to do a presentation on available data. When I started digging into the data requests, there was a big list of like metrics that was developed in last year's plan. And when I went to kind of start putting it together, I go, oh, does that mean something different to the public defender than it does to the DA? Does that mean something different to this group than this group? And I was left with a little bit of a conundrum in that. So I'm trying to develop perhaps a data dictionary or develop shared understanding of, hey, why are we asking for this piece? What does that mean, and how are you going to use it? It's great to want all this information, but if you don't know what it means and how to contextualize it, it's not particularly helpful. So that's part of my task over these next couple months. We also pushed it back to August, so that way it can include data from the full fiscal year. If I were to present it to you today, it would be missing a month, and that wouldn't be as helpful as a comparison point. So I'll be reaching out to you or your representatives on the CCPAB if you have one, if not, you directly, and hoping you can help me work with your staff to say, hey, here's what the ask was, here's what we think that looks like for us, here's where we need to maybe resolve a challenge, resolve some confusion, or if the information's not available, that's okay too. We just need to start somewhere. So that's the next priorities for me. I'm going to be busy these next couple months, so thank you in advance for your help sorting out some of that. And I'm really looking forward to sharing with you what I learn. Then that's the top priorities. So that's really where we're at. You have any feedback for our plan, any feedback for me in developing this work plan and keeping us on task, open to hear it.
Thank you. I'll turn to the partnership. Any questions or comments? See and hear none. None from myself as well. Clerk, any public comments as it relates to this item?
No, sir, no public comment.
Are the phones working, Clerk?
They are.
Excellent. Thank you for checking. With that, let's close public comment and turn to item 3, which I believe is more public comment.
Yes, item 3, public comment on non-agenda items. We have no public comments in the phone queue.
Excellent. Thank you. With that, if there are no closing comments, we are adjourned for today. Thank you all.